as said already in the introduction, we will change gears now a bit. And after hearing a very exciting talk about setting up a hospital in China, a digital or an internet hospital in China, I want to change gears to the topic how we can leverage digital health technologies in the development of drug candidates. And I will guide you through my presentation. I have some background information on digital health in general, but also an example, so it's not moving. Also an example of a project I want to share with you where we use digital health technology. But let's start with a very holistic view, first of all, from the helicopter perspective. And I mean, it would be preaching to the choir if I tell you the digital or the healthcare system and the pharmaceutical industry are digitally transformed. Everybody knows this. This is why we are here. But we also all know that it's not digitally transformed to the same extent like media or entertainment industry or music industry. But you can see on the right and on the left-hand side of this slide that there's significant digital transformation in healthcare and in pharma. And I want to speak about drug development today and want to speak about how we use sensor technology, digital health technologies, and e-health applications to better understand the capabilities and the safety of our drug candidates. So this is what I'm planning to do. But let's maybe start a bit with definitions to be on the same page. So what does digital health technology means? You see a number of pictures on the right-hand side. Sensors, wearables, things which are just sitting in your environment and capturing health information. So digital health technology, the definition for this is an electronic sensor which is usually connected to a computing platform which captures health information or information about the disease status, and it could be worn. For example, like a smartwatch or a wristband, it could be implanted. As you can see, there's this tiny biomonitor which is implanted under the skin to monitor your cardiac function. It could be ingested. I guess everybody has heard about smart pills. And it could be placed in the environment, like this tiny blue and white box you can see on the right-hand side. This will have another role in my presentation, which simply is sitting in your environment and capturing information about your sleep quality. And if you take these digital health technologies and you measure information about biological processes, maybe pathological processes or response to treatment, then we speak about digital biomarkers. And if you use these digital biomarkers in one of your drug development studies as an endpoint, it's called a digital endpoint. So just to be clear, sometimes it's interchanged these terminology, and it's important to keep that in mind. So where is it interesting to think about using digital health technologies in the drug development value chain? I don't want to go into all of the details of this slide, but I think it's obvious that in this long pathway from the first idea to a medicine, which usually takes between 12 and 15 years, and a significant investment, mainly in clinical studies, in clinical trials, and especially at the beginning of the clinical development process. When we speak about proof of concept studies, for example, it makes sense to use digital health technologies to gain further insights into safety and or efficacy of the drug candidate. And this is where I will focus on clinical trials dedicated to the development of drug candidates. And why should a developer or a clinician or a pharmaceutical company use digital health technologies? And there are many, many reasons. And this is not a complete list, of course, but as said, you can take information from devices to get additional information about safety and efficacy of your drug candidate. You can use this data, for example, after you have done a proof of concept study to support internal decision making. If you need to prioritize on which drug candidate you put your money, then usually this additional information can be very helpful, especially if you have done only smaller studies and have used conventional endpoints which potentially are not statistically significantly changed. Digital health technologies can help you to generate additional evidence. You can use this evidence to generate from your competitor, and of course, when you differentiate, it's always useful to have this data when you speak to, let's say, health authorities or the payers like health insurances and others. So overall, DHTs can help you to support your existing business models, but also, and I speak about that later, it can get you or give you access to new business models in your field. For patients, it means in a clinical study, if you capture data remotely at home, it means less site visits, more insights, and overall studies, hopefully, and this is what we hear from our patients, become more convenient. And as you can see on the right-hand side, sometimes digital health technologies also can help you to reduce the number of patients you need for your study. That's a very nice and very prominent example from Roche, which used an app in their clinical studies to reduce significantly the number of patients they needed to demonstrate efficacy and safety of their drug candidate. If digital health technologies should be used in a study, it's important to decide what you want to achieve with it. If you really want to do the step and use the digital biomarker you're measuring as a, let's say, primary endpoint of your study, of course, it requires a thorough validation, not just the technology, the hardware, the software you're using, but also the endpoint, the biomarker needs to be qualified and accepted. I speak to that in a minute. So we have clear information, you can see on the left-hand side, or clear guidance from FDA in the US. There's similar information available for Europe, of course. We have a lot of concepts being published, developed and being published by the Digital Medicine Society, the DIME. What you can see in the middle, the so-called V3 concept, which gives you clear understanding of what type of technical verification, of technical validation, of clinical validation, etc. you have to do until you can use digital health technologies and digital endpoints for let's say, regulatory purposes in your project. And finally, on the right-hand side, you see a publication which nicely illustrates how collaboration between different industries, pharmaceutical industry and the digital health technology providers, can be leveraged to use evidence which is already existing. So you do not need to do all the validation work on your own. It makes a lot of sense to speak to device manufacturers and to figure out whether they have data you potentially need if you want to step in front of FDA and argue for the acceptance of a certain endpoint. One other slide regarding these different regulatory frameworks you can see here. It's very high level. I don't want to dive too deep into that, but in general, it makes sense to distinguish between two different pathways when you want to use digital health technologies in your study. I want to start on the right-hand side. It's the so-called drug development tool qualification. So if you have a device, a hardware with certain software, and you want to bring this to acceptance as a drug development tool in general, let's say in a specific indication or overall, then of course this needs to be thoroughly validated. But here the focus is very much on the technology. This is a lengthy pathway. There are a few links you can go to this information and get more information. There are dedicated programs at FDA and at EMA to go that route. But usually from the drug manufacturer or drug developer perspective, the pathway on the left-hand side is much more attractive because this is about endpoint acceptance. So it's less about the technology. Of course, technology needs to be fit for purpose, but it's less about the technology. It's more about getting acceptance by FDA, by EMA, for something you measure with this technology, for this biomarker or this digital endpoint. And here it makes a lot of sense, and this is what I will speak about in a minute, to leverage an IND process, so the drug development pathway or the interaction you have started already with FDA, for example, and use and leverage, for example, Type B and Type C meetings with the FDA to discuss questions related to the technology and the endpoint you want to use in your program. It can lead to acceptance of this novel endpoint, of this digital endpoint, but in the end, this is just for you and for your specific case. It doesn't mean that your competitors immediately can copy-paste that and implemented that in their own drug development program. So this is, from my perspective, the more attractive pathway. And I want to share with you now an example where we exactly have gone that route, asking for acceptance of a novel digital endpoint. And at the same time, by implementing digital health technology in one of our development programs, we were hitting 3 different stones. First of all, we supported proof of concept of the drug candidate. The drug candidate is elinzanetant. I'll tell you a bit more about that in a minute. We generated data which helps to validate the endpoint and the technology in a specific context of use, in our context of use. And lastly, we generated data to differentiate from our competitors. And it's, maybe to go back for a second, it's in a context of women's health, and it's in the context of menopausal women suffering from sleep disturbances. And before I dive into the technical details, what we have done, let me provide you with a bit of background about menopause. So menopause is a condition each and every woman in their life will experience. It's not a disease, it's a condition, but it has a lot of symptoms. And you can see here a variety of symptoms. And the most important, at least when you listen to women, are vasomotor symptoms on the left-hand side. Vasomotor symptoms means hot flushes, sweating, increases in heart rate, waking up during the night if this happens. This is a very disturbing symptoms and very impairing symptoms. But the second most important symptom is sleep disturbance during night. And this is where I want to focus now in my presentation, even though there are many, many, many other symptoms I don't want to touch today, which make menopause a challenge for women who are affected. So why is sleep so important? So up to almost 70% of midlife women suffer from sleep disturbance during menopause. And interestingly, this prevalence is very similar across different ethnicities and different regions in the world. And if you ask women to rate the average bother of sleep disturbances on a scale between 0 and 5, the outcome is around 4, which I consider impressive. This is really a big impairment. There's a huge medical need. Sleep impairment leads to tiredness during the day, lack of energy, and all the other symptoms you can read there. And it has a huge impact on your work productivity and the ability to perform daily tasks. So therefore, we consider this relevant. And if you ask women to describe the sleep disturbance, then they tell you, okay, I wake up frequently during the night, I lie awake, cannot go back to sleep. Sometimes I have difficulties to fall asleep in the evening after going to bed. So if you want to develop a drug, it makes a lot of sense to think about these opinions and what women describe. And if you think about clinical endpoints of a drug development study in which you want to show efficacy, it makes sense to measure, for example, wakefulness after sleep onset, meaning summing up all the awake periods per night in minutes. Usually it's something, let's say, half an hour, 45 minutes, maybe even more per night, which is then reported. It makes sense to assess how long does it take before sleep sets on, and the number of awakenings, also to count them, is an important strategy to see whether a drug candidate has a positive effect on this condition. Fortunately, there's hope. Bayer has developed a drug candidate, and it's not longer a candidate, it's in the market already, which is called elinzanetant. Elinzanetant is a dual neurokinin receptor inhibitor, NK1 and NK3 inhibitor. And you can see here a brief sketch of the mode of action. I want to walk you through that. Start on the left-hand side. So during menopause, as we all know, estrogen levels decrease. And with decreasing estrogen levels, we get to a point where so-called candy neurons in the hypothalamus in the brain become hypertrophic and hyperactive. So usually estrogen suppresses the activity of these neurons. If estrogen levels go down, you have this hyperactivation. And hyperactivation means increased signaling via the NK3 receptor pathway in green and the NK1 receptor pathway in blue. NK3 is involved in thermoregulation, so it makes a lot of sense. If this pathway is increased, signaling is increased, you experience symptoms like vasomotor symptoms, hot flushes, increases in heart rate. And if the NK1 receptor is activated, sleep will be disturbed. We all know, or maybe we know, that substance P, which is the endogenous receptor agonist, if this is infused, our sleep is disturbed. It's interrupted. We lie awake during the night. And this is exactly what's happening with menopausal women. If this receptor pathway becomes activated, sleep is disturbed. It has an impact on mood. And our compound, elinzanetant, blocks both of these receptors. This is a unique mode of action. This is a first-in-class compound, and it's a new therapeutic options for people who want to treat sleep disturbances and vasomotor symptoms in menopausal women. First evidence have been generated in our phase 3 program that the drug is efficacious not just on reducing vasomotor symptoms. This was a primary endpoint of our phase 3 program to see which effect we have on severity and frequency of vasomotor symptoms. There, the drug is very sufficient and safe. But in addition, we asked women to fill in questionnaires. And what you see here in these two figures, and you can focus maybe on the left-hand side because they are giving you the same message. You can see that if you ask women to fill out these questionnaires, this promise SDSF8, this is a sleep quality-related questionnaire. You can see that immediately after, let me see whether I have a pointer. Yeah, immediately after onset of treatment with elinzanetant, this is this violet or purple curve here, compared to placebo, this is the gray curve, you see immediately a decrease in the ratings in this questionnaire, in the sleep quality-related questionnaire, which indicates that sleep quality is improving. Women are experiencing already after a few days improved sleep quality. Then, after 12 weeks, this is this blue line here in the middle, after 12 weeks, the placebo team, or the placebo group was set on elinzanetant as well, and you could see almost the same effect, like in the elinzanetant team. And after 26 weeks, when all were taking off the compound, the sleep quality went back to a poor sleep quality. So a very nice first indication that elinzanetant is efficacious in this indication to improve sleep quality. However, it's subjective. And of course, it was our desire to show this objectively, that this is the case. And we were tasked to develop a proof of concept study to show that sleep quality is objectively improved. The gold standard to assess, and now I come back to the digital health technologies, the gold standard to assess sleep quality is polysomnography. You can see spending at least one night at the hospital, wired with multiple electrodes, is not very comfortable and of course, doesn't provide you with real insights into natural sleep. However, it's a gold standard. It's very comprehensive assessment of sleep quality. You get information about sleep architecture because you are also measuring brainwave activity. And therefore, it's considered the gold standard for sleep studies. However, our goal was for our program to see to which extent we can replace this gold standard by a digital health technology which could be used at home to capture sleep quality parameters, and then not just to support our proof of concept study, but also to generate evidence that potentially in later development during phase 3, we can partially or completely replace this gold standard by a digital health technology which can be used at home. After doing a landscape analysis, searching for suitable technologies, we came to the conclusion that the sleep is one system. You can see it here. It's this box in front of the bed, which is using radar technology by scanning the body surface with millimeter waves and analyzing the reflected signal. This system is able to assess not just vital sign parameters like heart rate and breathing pattern, but also to assess sleep quality parameters. It's a medical device. It's cleared in Europe and in US as a class 2 medical device. And it's simply put beside your bed, switched on at the beginning of the study, and after 12 weeks you can switch it off. And in this entire period, you're collecting sleep quality data compared to individual nights in the sleep laboratory where you have only point-in-time assessment. So our challenge was to demonstrate that this device is fit for purpose also for menopausal women suffering from sleep disturbance for our specific study. So to replace polysomnography with this smart technology. To do so, we had interactions with the health authorities, with the FDA in this case. We had a pre-IND meeting and asked what FDA thinks about our suggestion to use this technology. We received clear feedback what we should do. And of course, this feedback directed us to this guidance document, this FDA guidance document. And we immediately felt that we need to do a gap analysis. So what kind of evidence for the validation of this technology in our context is already available? And what kind of evidence do we need to generate? And what you can see in the upper half of the slide is that going back to this V3 concept, verification, validation, clinical validation, and usability testing, we felt that a lot of the data, especially the technical piece of the validation, is already available, and that we only, on quotes, need to develop clinical validation data and to do some additional, as you can see on the right-hand side, some additional user testing in our target population. And based on that, we entered into a collaboration with a device manufacturer and designed the study together and performed the study together to find, first of all, or to generate, first of all, the proof of concept for our compound and to generate validation data for this emerging and promising technology. This is our study design. On the left-hand side, you can see 12 weeks of treatment, elinzanetant versus placebo. And during these 12 weeks, we generated polysomnography data, the gold standard, which was required at baseline, after 4 weeks and after 12 weeks. At the same time, we used the sleepist device, the touchless sensor in the sleep laboratory, to have data to compare the gold standard with the new technology. And we asked study participants to use the device over 12 weeks at home. And this is a unique design because we have gold standard polysomnography, we have home sleep testing, and patient-reported outcome information. So we ask individuals to fill in sleep-related questionnaires. This is a unique design. This hasn't been done before in this indication. And now I want to come to the three birds we wanted to hit with this study design, with our approach. First bird was create proof of concept for our drug candidate. VASO, I mentioned, this is the sum of all awakenings during the night, was assessed with the sleepist device each and every night. And what you can see on this chart here is for the elinzanetant groups, the upper chart, and the placebo groups, the lower chart, information about VASO, so the time spending awake during night, for each and every night. So every square, every colored square in this figure is one night, and green and red indicates whether it's an improvement of VASO or a deterioration of VASO, or gray means no change of VASO compared to baseline measurements. So we had 1 week baseline measurements, and you immediately can see that in the elinzanetant group, even though not every night is green, which is natural because sleep is very variable, you can immediately see that there's much more green in the elinzanetant treated group compared to placebo. And if you boil this down, if you like, let's say, box plots, if you integrate all the information of these, is it more than 80 nights? Yeah? If you integrate all of this information into one box plot, you can see that we had an improvement of VASO measured with a home sleep monitor of minus 17 minutes, which is really relevant if you imagine you sleep 17 minutes more per night. This is in line with what women reported. They said, okay, I felt that I slept 8 minutes roughly more during the nights. And when we integrated the 6 or the 4 different polysomnography nights where individuals have been in the sleep laboratory, we found that if we integrate 4-week and 12-week data, that it's 10 minutes more sleep per night, even in the sleep laboratory, which is a very artificial sleep environment. So this is what we found. So first bird was hit. Second bird, and I keep it short, second bird we wanted to hit was demonstrate that the home sleep monitor we are using is measuring more or less what the polysomnography is measuring. Of course, it cannot measure the same because polysomnography uses, 15, 20 different electrodes, and this is a touchless sensor. But we analyzed on 2 different levels, and I don't go into the details now in the interest of time. We assessed the performance of the device, and we felt that in assessing wake and sleep status, the system is sufficient for our purposes to be used in a clinical study to assess efficacy of a drug candidate. And we also found that all the parameters like WASO and sleep efficiency and total sleep time over the night, all the list you can see here below on the slide, all these parameters are very close to what the polysomnography is measuring. Of course, there's certain bias, but this is acceptable. And we found a very nice retest reliability. So overall, we are willing to further use this technology in our ongoing clinical trial or clinical development program of elinzanetant. And the third bird, I mentioned differentiation from competitors, creating some, let's say, positive noise around your drug candidate. We were also successful. We presented at a number of conferences, nationally and internationally, and there we created a lot of attention. And last but not least, maybe I can skip this, but all this data, no, let me spend a second. All this data was pulled into a central database, a so-called DEEP platform. Maybe if you like, you can research this. This is a platform which enabled us to collaborate between Sleepis and Bayer in a very smart way and exchange the information we needed for health authorities. Let me quickly go to the global view. This is one example how digital health technologies have been used as endpoints in a clinical study. If you go to the DIME database, the library of digital endpoints, you will find more than 500 cases. If you go to case reports which were submitted to EMA and FDA, you will find approximately 50 cases where drug companies have used digital endpoints to support the application for drug approval. And if you really ask for this broad acceptance of a specific endpoint in a broad indication, general for everybody, then we have two examples. We have the muscle Duchenne dystrophy example, where we have the stride velocity as accepted endpoint, general accepted endpoint, and we have the moderate to vigorous physical activity, which was captured with an Actigraph device in the Bellerophon program, which was accepted as primary endpoint in a phase 3 study. So this is currently what we see globally. I skip this one. Overall, as mentioned, I see that digital health technologies can be useful tools in drug development. But in addition, they have, and this is what you can see in the middle, they have the potential for new business models like drug device combinations, or they could be standalone business models. Of course, for the medical device industry, usually not for pharma. But if you think, for example, about digital therapeutics, again, this is something where pharmaceutical industry starts to generate more programs or more projects heading in this direction, to have a digital therapeutic where there is no active ingredient except the software any longer. So with this, I hope it became clear there's a huge potential of digital health technologies to support your drug development, to assess safety and efficacy, huge upside potential for novel business models. There's a lot of guidance from FDA and others already available if you want to implement it in your program. And finally, I hope it became clear that the program we have done was only possible as we interacted and collaborated with the device manufacturer, in this case with Sleepis. Max Siegholz, the CFO of Sleepis, is in the room. So if you have questions about technology and their business model, please reach out to Max. If you have questions regarding elinzanetant and what we are doing elsewhere and other indications, please feel free to reach out to me anytime. And with this, I finish, and I'm happy to take your questions later on in the discussion round.